it should be no surprise that the hottest club in Germany is Bayern Munich.
Perisic knocked it down, and finally the dam is broken. Thomas Müller, the man for all seasons, sets Bayern Munich going in 2020. What a big goal that could be.
Davis bursting into action again, leaving Christensen for dead. Lewandowski waiting in the middle, tap in! Robert Lewandowski, that's 39 goals this season for Bayern Munich's hitman.
Bayern still have it, and they're still probing. Now Kimmich tries to float Burki. He's done it! The goal comes! What a goal in der Klassiker!
Bayern have won 16 of their last 17 games and sit 7 points ahead of second-place Dortmund. With 5 games left, they appeared to be well on their way to their 8th straight Bundesliga title. But back on November 3rd, this didn't seem so inevitable. At the time, Bayern had just sacked their head coach, Niko Kovac, and hired assistant Hansi Flick on an interim basis. Today, we retrace Hansi Flick's career and explain how he might be building the next Bayern Munich dynasty.
Bayern doing great. They are on course for the title. 7 points clear in the Bundesliga. In the Champions League, they have done fantastic as well.
Manuel Veth covers the Bundesliga for Forbes and Transfermarkt.
That 3-0 result against Chelsea just before the COVID-19 break, I think that overall the club is in a very good position at the moment.
A lot of their success or recent success comes from Hansi Flick taking over the head coach position. How would you describe Hansi for someone who hasn't seen or heard him before?
He's very quiet. I'm very fortunate that when I'm in Munich, I go to many of the press conferences and I'm spoken to him in the mixed zone and after Bayern games at the Allianz Arena. And he's a very quiet person, a very direct person.
What's the situation with Goretzka? Is he fit? Will he be playing?
Ja, zum Taktischen möchte ich nicht allzu viel sagen.
I don't want to really say too much about our tactics. Leon joined in training today, so he should be able to play tomorrow.
He's not, a shrill coach, not a huge, that's maybe not fair. I wanted to say not a huge personality, but he obviously has a big personality, but it's not, overwhelming. He's very, I don't want to say technocrat either. All those terms sound so negative, but they describe him quite well at the same time. He is not someone who stands out in this Bayern Munich Shark Tank that has so many superstars, right? So I think he is more of an organizer, manager, more someone who likes to be in the background.
Yeah, he sounds a bit more measured.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you do go to his press conference and listen to him, it's not like huge statements. It's not the kind of stuff that you hear from big managers like Jose Mourinho or like even Pep Guardiola. It's just matter-of-fact statements.
Weiß, was sie erwartet.
My team knows what to expect.
Und wir, wie schon gesagt haben, wir wollen mutig,
as I said, we want to be
selbstbewusst spielen, nach vorne
want to be
spielen.
confident, play for attack.
Wir sind, wirklich in dieser Anfang der Rückrunde, jetzt will ich auch in der Spur und von daher bin ich da wirklich voller Selbstvertrauen, auch was
I'm really full of confidence that we can achieve that and that they can play a really good performance.
But it's always very clear of what he wants and what he wants to achieve. And I think that it's hard to describe his personality really because I don't want to, again, as I just said, I don't think he has no personality because obviously he does, but it's not something that's like right in your face.
So let's talk about maybe how his career started. Like most managers, we know that he started his career as a player. So just how good was he as a player?
Yeah, he was okay. He wasn't a superstar by any means, but he did play for Bayern, right? In the 80s, he played for Köln. In the 90s, early 90s, 104 games for Bayern Munich. That's quite an achievement. I mean, the 80s were a little bit of a different time, but he still won 4 German championships with them. And that's quite an achievement in itself. And played in midfield So I would say he had a solid career. He did manage 2 games for the German U18 side, but did not play for the national team. He was a good player, obviously, but he wasn't a superstar of the Bundesliga.
He finished his career at the age of 28 due to a run of injuries. So what did he do after that?
Well, first he didn't do anything. You know, he played for fun, I think, for Viktoria Bammental, a regional side. And then around 96, he started coaching them for 4 years until he went into that Hoffenheim setup, right? In the early Hoffenheim years, became a coach there. So it was something, you know, it wasn't something that he just like went straight into. I think he didn't even really plan it. So it was, football was over. He opened the sports store and then, I think kind of fell into this management role a little bit.
He seems like he's really had to work for everything he has, as a player and as a manager. He's always kind of, he was never the superstar, as you said, and he's always a bit understated or maybe overlooked a little bit.
It comes with the fact that he wasn't a superstar in the league, right? Workhorse midfielder who never left a huge mark. And if you retire at 28 and you kind of silently go away, it was always the nice Mr. Flick, right? And I think when you have that kind of a stigma, then you kind of have to work your way up, and people maybe forget that what a kind of influence and what is his experience, how much of an experience he does have. And I think it's really interesting how when you look at his coaching career early on, especially at Hoffenheim, that he was the head coach there. But even then, when the project progressed right into their Bundesliga ambitions, they went with other coaches. They brought in Ralf Rangnick, right? And then he went to Red Bull really briefly to be an assistant. And even when he became the assistant of Joachim Löw in 2006, a lot of people were like, wow, Hansi Wu, like he wasn't really a known quantity in many ways, but yet he was so influential in the background with everything he did.
It's Germany's time again. World Cup winners for a 4th time. Only Brazil can beat that.
You mentioned that he worked with Jogi Löw in 2006 with the German national team. What was kind of his role or responsibility with the team, and kind of how important was he for Germany's success in that time period? He worked with the team until 2014 when, of course, they won the World Cup.
Yeah, I think he was extremely influential. Joachim Löw's biggest problem throughout his career was always that he was a bit of a tinkerer, someone who experiments for experimenting's sake. And I think that Hansi Flick brought a lot of structure to Joachim Löw's coaching. I think that when you look at the German national team, when you look at their run of form from 2006 to 2014, a time that saw them reach the final and of the European Championship.
One last chance for Germany to save it. One last chance for Manuel maybe to make some history. And they've taken it short, and it's Italy. England's conquerors are European finalists.
They came 3rd in 2010.
Diego Forlan! Oh, he's hit the crossbar. That's how close he came, and it was the last kick. And it means that Uruguay have failed to stop the Germans from finishing 3rd.
2014, and they ended up winning the World Cup, right? In 2012, they reached the semi-finals of the European Championship. It was a very successful time for Germany, and with a team that was very much deemed the golden generation. In many ways, Joachim Löw was very lucky to manage that golden generation of players, but it was very difficult at times to get all those different players into a system and make it work. And it always seemed like at that last hurdle, the German national team seemed to fail, right? To finally win that title until it finally happened in 2014. And I think when you hear about the stories in Brazil when they won the World Cup, Hansi Flick gets mentioned quite a bit in terms of what he brought tactically to the team. The fact that he finally convinced Joachim Löw that a standard situation, set pieces are important in football. I think that shows that he was quite influential. And I think when you look at the national team, especially during a tournament, the head coach or manager is more of a management position, and the assistant coaches, and Hansi Flick was the head assistant, right, do the actual work. And I think you can see from when Hansi Flick was there to when Hansi Flick left, the German football kind of dropped off a little bit, right? And I don't think we would have had the same outcome in 2018 or even 2016 when they were beaten by France in the semi-final if Hansi Flick were still there.
So what you're kind of saying is that, a lot of the praise that we put on Jogi Löw should also be going on Hansi Flick, and that he might not have been getting some of the tactical headlines that maybe his boss was getting.
Oh, absolutely.
So we know his relationship with Jogi Löw, and that undoubtedly, I'm sure, influenced him a bit. Who are some of his other coaching influences that have made him who he is?
He himself has mentioned Trapattoni and Lattek. He's talked about Louis van Gaal quite a bit. I think when you hear coaches say names like that, those are the names that they will always mention, right? Yeah. I mean, everyone in that generation was in one way or another influenced by Louis van Gaal. If you look at Louis van Gaal in general, what he left at Bayern as a legacy is quite fundamental. Just in general, like Hansi Flick's admiration of Louis van Gaal aside, Louis van Gaal had 2 very tumultuous years in Munich.
Kraft left embarrassed and Arjen Robben sent off for dissent at the final whistle as Bayern were held, missing the chance to make up ground on eventual champions Borussia Dortmund in the title race. Nuremberg's joy was Van Gaal's pain. The Dutchman would be sacked by Bayern the following week.
But those 2 years were incredibly important of where the club is today, right? And I think when you look at Louis van Gaal as a whole, he left a huge legacy to world football. I think we kind of underestimating how big of an influence it is in terms of his football philosophy, his playing style, the way that his teams dominated games. And I think in that regard, Louis van Gaal, I think, influenced pretty much everyone, including, coaches that worked at Bayern before and after him. I mean, Jupp Heynckes is an example. Jupp Heynckes worked with Hansi Flick, and then Heynckes came to basically navigate the difficult process after Louis van Gaal, but basically went on with the same playing philosophy. And I think when you look at the way Hansi Flick coaches, it's almost Louis van Gaal football, but it's Jupp Heynckes' personality. The team and the players and the tactics come first. They are more important than the coach.
It's interesting you say that because Bayern CEO Karl-Heinz Rummenigge compared Hansi Flick with Heynckes and several other greats. So you're saying that he's a kind of a blend of a lot of previous Bayern coaches.
He's probably the best blend of a previous Bayern coaches. I mean, let's just throw Pep Guardiola in there as well, shall we? Because there's another one that's likes to really dominate the football. But I think we all talk about tiki-taka and Pep Guardiola's dominance of the ball and the way he plays, and we really forget that Pep Guardiola basically just learned from Johan Cruyff and Louis van Gaal as well, right? I mean, that's something that we have to keep in mind. We always think that Pep Guardiola invented the game, but really he's just using tactics and philosophy of coaches that he's worked with. And I mean, in fairness, Hansi Flick does the same. I think that they all kind of learn from each other. Football is kind of a little bit like Formula One. There's a lot of industrial espionage going on. Everyone just copies each other, right? If a system works, you will see it quickly established at every club around the world. But yeah, I do think that's a fair thing to say. He's a blend of a lot of the former Bayern coaches, and in some ways the best blend, because I think at Bayern, and this is a really important thing, and I've pointed this out on a couple other podcasts, I've written about it, Bayern isn't about the coach. This is why Louis van Gaal wasn't long-term successful there, or even Pep Guardiola clashed with the heads at Bayern. It's always been about the players, right? So the best coaches at Bayern, like Jupp Heynckes, they are fantastic coaches, but they're not necessarily a really big personality, right? They almost let the players do all the talking and let the players be at the forefront of things. And I think Hansi Flick, that is almost Hansi Flick's best quality. And that's why he's being so often compared to Jupp Heynckes.
Are you a fan of football today? Then why not support the show and sign up to our new Patreon page? You'll get access to bonus episodes, full interviews, and extra content. Just go on Patreon and search Football Today. Now, back to the episode. Let's get back to his career. So after being an assistant with the national team, he becomes the sporting director of the German Football Association for 3 years from 2014 to 2017. Then this past summer, he was hired to be Niko Kovac's assistant. So can you kind of describe what happened to Bayern Munich the first 10 games that led to Niko Kovac's firing in November?
Yeah, I think that Bayern Munich's best transfer last summer was to bring in Hansi Flick as an assistant. I think that was, in hindsight, although a few people have written about it, Jonathan Harding, for example, I've written an article about it at the Times too, that Hansi Flick really was their most important transfer, because the problem with Niko Kovac, and I think Niko Kovac is a fantastic coach, but his football philosophy of counter-pressing, more of an Atletico Madrid kind of style football just doesn't fit to Bayern. Bayern has to have 90% of the ball. That's how they work as a team. They need to complete 90% of their passes and have the majority of possession. They play almost like Ajax, right? And that is a philosophy set out by Van Halen. They have really inhaled as the way they want to play. And Niko Kovac wasn't about that. He basically wanted to fundamentally change the way Bayern play. And in the first season, it sort of went all right, but it clashed a lot with a lot of the players. Thomas Müller is probably the one that he clashed with the most, and you're always in big trouble at Bayern if you clash with Thomas Müller.
I think he opened cans of worms vis-a-vis, for example, the Thomas Müller benching. That certainly hasn't helped them either.
And it just, at some point the players just didn't buy it into it anymore. And I think the club hoped in the summer that by bringing in Hansi Flick, they could sort of moderate between Niko Kovac and the players. And that's where things went wrong. I mean, I was in Frankfurt when they got smashed 5-1.
Last time they conceded more was back when Jürgen Klinsmann was coach. They might concede more today. Andre Silva, Paciencia makes it 5. That's exactly what happens. Andre Silva seemed to waltz through the Bayern defence in slow motion.
That was not a pretty sight. I mean, Bayern were all over the place. They were not able to insert a dominance. And it was very much a telling game in terms of what went wrong under Niko Kovac over the last 2 years.
So after that, they make Flick the head coach temporarily, and then they later make it permanent. What did he do to change the team?
I think he just went back to Bayern's fundamentals. Let Thomas Müller have his free role. Don't try to put him into a box. He incorporated some of the good things, like keep Alphonso Davies on left back, but give him a more freer role. Don't put him into a heavy tactical concept.
Bayern away to Köln, fluidly gathering the kick out. Davies plays a nifty 1-2 with Serge Gnabry, and then he's off. Straight upfield in top gear, with marker Dominik Drexler trailing in his wake. Combined with that explosive pace, he also has the all-important eye for a colleague. And accuracy of pass to match. This time the finish doesn't quite do justice to the build-up.
Then he really stabilized the midfield. He went back to saying when we play, we have to have the ball. He kept it. If you have the best players in the world, and Bayern 90% of the time, wherever they face around the planet, they're the favorites to win, right? And that's because they have some of the best players on the planet. And I think if you have that, you need to really give them more freedom than anything else, the freedom to be creative. I mean, how often do we talk about Pep Guardiola's biggest masterstroke being that he basically freed Lionel Messi from any tactical constraints? And I think that's what he did. He talked to the players and he gave them the freedom to be creative. And Thomas Müller is a fantastic example for that. I mean, he now leads the league in assists.
And with Hansi Flick, it's a complete different momentum and dynamic, really. Flick has made him one of the key players in that team, which was not the case with Kovac, and that changes everything. But today, in a game where you thought maybe Bayern would lose a bit of creativity with no Thiago Alcantara, with no Gnabry there as well on the pitch, Thomas Müller basically picked the pieces, if you want, and then created the first goal, scored one as well, and was everywhere on that pitch in that free role that is probably his best position.
Everyone thought his career would be more or less done.
He is a Bayern Munich living legend, a world champion with Germany. Thomas Müller's career has been exceptional, but at only 30, he's been dropped from the national team and is about to leave Bayern Munich. What the hell happened to Thomas Müller?
I think that's really what he did primary. I was at the Klassiker when Bayern smashed Dortmund 4-0. And that game was just a fantastic example of what freedom and confidence can do to players when the coach just tells them to go out there and, still play a tactical concept, play a tactical concept that they understand and have known for many years.
So how do the players feel about Hansi Flick? You mentioned, obviously, they have a lot more creativity and freedom to do what makes them the best players in the world.
Yeah, I think they really like him. I can't remember which game that was, but I spoke to Manuel Neuer in the mixed zone about Hansi Flick, and he called him a Menschenfänger. Now, this is a term that we often use for Jürgen Klopp, right? So he's someone who can capture people and basically have them follow him. Does it in a very different way, though. It's not as charismatic and loud and shrill. It's in a different way. I think he's just able to really convince the players that his path is the right path. And I think when you look through the board, I mentioned Thomas Müller already, but even like someone like David Alaba, who's now playing centre back. David Alaba has always been kind of unhappy about having to play left back because he thought it wasn't a central enough position for his skills. And although Alaba is still apparently sometimes unhappy that he doesn't play in midfield, he's now extremely happy he's playing in centre back because he feels like he has more of a control over the field, right? You look at what he did to Thiago. This is a player that has been criticized for many, many years, and all of a sudden, Thiago is back to his best, and Joshua Kimmich playing in midfield as well now, and I think he just gives players what they want. I think a good head coach and a good manager is able to insert their thoughts and their philosophies while also giving their employees what they want. And I think that is the key term of leadership. And I think Hansi Flick incorporates that element better than any other coach in a long time at Bayern.
And it seems like the Bayern board are quite pleased with him, not just because of the results, but it feels like he's kind of brought back the Bayern identity. And I've noticed in a couple of interviews, he's referenced the club motto, Mia San Mia.
Ein Ziel, ein Sieg für die Geschichte. Stern des Südens in hellem Lichte.
Yeah, we are who we are, right? And then Mir San Mir is almost like a mantra at Bayern. It's like a religious term. It's very important for the club. I think the biggest strength of Bayern Munich as a club has always been that they have been through the generations been able to bring back players that have been successful at the club and reincorporate them into the club structure and sort of keep that tradition going. I mean, when you look around the world at teams that have failed to do what Bayern have done, you know that being successful over long periods of time, over decades really, is because at some point they didn't have a succession plan. You know, at Manchester United, for example, there was no real succession plan after Ferguson. The former players, the people that played for him, they didn't come in and just took over the reign. The same happened at Liverpool in the early 90s, right? There wasn't a clear succession path. Bayern always had a clear succession path. The players and everyone who was involved, sooner or later, the best of them would come back and make sure the tradition would continue. And I think Hansi Flick, although not an obvious choice, is, as a former Bayern player, understands what that means. I mean, that's also partly the reason why they brought in Niko Kovac. It just turned out that his tactical ideas didn't quite fit because Niko Kovac played for Bayern as well, right? And that was a big selling point for the club at the time. It's just that tactically it didn't fit. So Flick's tactics fit a lot better with what Bayern want to show in terms of their playing style, but he also fits the club identity because he's lived it. He's played for them. He knows exactly what the club is about.
If we look forward, Hansi Flick was signed as a permanent manager for 3 years back in April. How far do you think he can take this Bayern team?
Yeah, I would have loved to see the Champions League run because I think they have a very good chance of maybe winning the treble. I mean, there is talk Champions League football is coming back in August, right? And some sort of tournament is going to be played. But at their current form, they must feel robbed because I don't think there's any team in Europe right now that is better than them. And if they can preserve that form and the players that are now rumored to come in, because I think that despite COVID-19, they're one of the very few clubs around the planet that have the financials to actually still sign players, right? And I think that will maybe help them to set up a dynasty. And I think they have a chance to win another treble, like they did with Heinkes.
You can follow Manuel Veth's coverage of the German Bundesliga on Forbes and Transfermarkt, and you can listen to him regularly on the Gegenpressing Bundesliga podcast. This episode was produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening to Football Today.